Coming up on Primetime News, while the debate grows over changes to the public pension program between Korea's ruling and opposition parties, President Park says the revision will need public consent. North Korea is now detaining 4 South Korean nationals, prompting speculation that Pyongyang might use them to retain leverage for inter-Korean talks. And household debt in Korea soars at the fastest pace in 9 years in March on the back of a record low key rate. Stay tuned for these stories and more. Hello and welcome to Primetime News on this Monday, May 4th. I'm Hwang Ji-hye.
And I'm Daniel Choy. Thank you for joining us.
President Park Geun-hye, who had fallen ill after returning from her recent South America tour, went back to work earlier today.
And at a meeting with her senior secretary, she made clear her positions on the bipartisan agreement on public pension reforms, the aftermath of a high-profile bribery scandal, and criticism of her policies in Japan.
Our Choi Yoo-sun starts us off.
Upon her return from a week-long break due to an illness, President Park Geun-hye addressed bipartisan efforts to revise the country's deficit-ridden public employee pension system. However, she expressed disappointment that the reform plan will only reduce the public burden next year by $3 million a day.
개혁의 폭과 20년이라는 긴 세월의 속도가 당초 국민들이 기대했던 수준에는 미치지 못해서 매우 아쉽게 생각합니다.
The president also raised concerns about a trade-off deal between the two parties to raise the national pension coverage to 50% of a subscriber's nominal income level.
해당 부처와도 사전에 충분히 논의하고 국민적 공감대를 형성한 후에 신중히 결정해야 한다고 생각합니다.
As for a recent bribery scandal involving the country's political heavyweights, President Park vowed to eradicate corruption and sever the collusive ties between politics and business. She said that 2 pardons granted to Hwang Ji-hye, a deceased businessman at the center of the scandal, should be investigated and a president's right to grant a pardon reviewed. President Park has been under pressure to revise her Japan policy amid concerns Korea has fallen into diplomatic isolation following Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe's recent U.S. visit. She responded by saying Abe has become the target of criticism in the U.S. after his failure to address and apologize for Japan's wartime sex slavery system while addressing Congress. President Park urged officials to continue her two-track approach of taking a hardline stance on historical issues while exercising diplomacy to maintain good relations with regional powers, a move which analysts say reflects her confidence in her foreign policies. Choi Yoo-sun, Arirang News.
And while the president asked for public approval over changes to the National Pension Fund, the agreement between the rival parties does not look like a done deal.
They're still wrangling over the revisions, and now the ruling party steps back, saying issue needs further discussion. Our Ji Myung-gil has more.
Lawmakers will vote this week on a long-awaited bill that will revise the pension system for public servants, following an agreement by the rival parties over the weekend. But there is a brewing controversy between them over possible revisions to the National Pension Fund. The main opposition party favors revisions that would raise the amount that pension subscribers would receive in payouts each month after they retire from 40% of their annual income to 50%. Under the plan, a person who earns roughly $920 a month would receive $460 a month instead of $370. Some ruling party members have objected to the plan because the government will still need to find more money to cover the cost of the plan, either through taxation or by raising premiums. But they have yet to offer an alternative. According to the National Pension Research Institute, the number of National Pension Fund beneficiaries will exceed the number of contributors by 2060 because of the country's growing elderly population and low fertility rate. The Welfare Ministry predicts the National Pension Fund will be completely depleted by 2060. A special National Assembly committee will be formed to draw up a relevant bill on the opposition party's plan, with the goal of passing the bill by September. Also, the rival parties predict that some $300 billion in government funds will be saved over the next 70 years if the reforms to the public servant pension system are successful. Korea's pension system for public servants has long faced a looming crisis and run a deficit of $11 billion every year until last year. Kim Young-gil, Arirang News.
And South Korea has taken the first step to launching a possible ceremony marking the 15th anniversary of the landmark June 15th Inter-Korean Declaration. Seoul's Unification Ministry says that it approved a South Korean civic group's request to meet with North Koreans to discuss planning for the event. They will hold talks with representatives from the North for 2 days starting Tuesday. The ministry says the group also plans to hold a separate civilian-level cultural and academic event along with the ceremony. If the Inter-Korean event is held, it will be a first since 2008. With North Korea's latest detention of a South Korean college student, the regime is now holding 4 South Korean nationals. The government here says it will work for the swift release of its citizens, but there are lingering doubts about that. Hwang Ji-hye reports.
South Korea on Monday urged Pyongyang to release the latest South Korean citizen to be detained by the regime.
The government strongly demands that North Korea swiftly free Joo Won-moon so that he can return to his family.
The 21-year-old Jew has been identified as a permanent resident of the U.S. and a student at New York University. North Korea claims he was arrested in late April while trying to enter the country illegally. The South's Unification Ministry said it would work for Ju's swift release, but there are lingering doubts about its ability to succeed. Ju is not the only South Korean national to be detained in Pyongyang. A South Korean missionary has been held since late 2013 on suspicion of spying and allegedly trying to set up underground churches. In March, Pyongyang said it had detained 2 South Korean citizens and accused them of working as spies for Seoul's National Intelligence Service. South Korea says it has offered to hold talks with the North on the issue. It's also sought help from countries with embassies in both Koreas, but to no avail. With the clock ticking, experts say the government should consider all measures to protect its citizens.
Whether it's holding under-the-table negotiations, dispatching an envoy, or using mediators such as Russia, I think it's an urgent matter that must be resolved through inter-Korean talks.
Experts say such detainments will become more frequent if inter-Korean relations remain frosty. They add that the 4 detainees will likely be used as bargaining chips should the 2 Koreas sit down for talks. Hwang Ji-hye, Arirang News.
And there's growing speculation that Pyongyang could launch another long-range rocket soon after the North unveiled a new satellite control center over the weekend. But South Korea's defense ministry says a missile test is unlikely to happen in the near future. Na Yeon-young explains why.
South Korea says there's no indication that North Korea is planning an immediate long-range ballistic missile test. This came at a regular press briefing at Seoul's defense ministry on Monday, a day after North Korean leader Kim Jong-un was reported to have visited a new satellite command and control center. Defense Ministry spokesman Kim Min-seok said the facility unveiled on Sunday is different from the one Pyongyang showed to foreign journalists in 2012 before it launched a satellite into orbit. He also said the new center, which is reportedly a lot bigger than the old one, doesn't seem to be operating yet, but added that if it opens, it will allow Pyongyang to have greater control over its long-range missile launches. North Korea has been calling its satellite launches purely scientific, but the international community views them as disguised missile tests because in practical terms, the only difference between a satellite and a missile is what is mounted on the rocket. The North is also known to have been extending its rocket launch pad in Dongchangri on the west coast since late 2013. If successful, officials believe North Korea will be able to launch rockets that are larger than the 30-meter-long Euna-3 rocket launched in 2012. However, an unnamed South Korean government official said Monday that the extension work will take at least another couple of months. 나현경, Arirang News.
Also, an American scientist claims that if worse comes to worse, South Korea could make dozens of nuclear warheads within a 5-year period to counter North Korea's nuclear program. Local experts say this scenario is highly unlikely, but could be possible if Seoul feels like it's been run into a corner. For details, we turn to our Kim Yeon-bin.
Charles Ferguson, president of the Federation of American Scientists, said in a report last week that if the U.S. was perceived as being unable to reliably counter the threats posed by China and North Korea, Japan and South Korea will want to take steps to have their own nuclear capabilities.
Hypothetically, if North Korea perfects its nuclear weaponry and becomes a clear threat to the South, and if the U.S. doesn't provide a nuclear umbrella on the peninsula, Seoul would have no choice but to develop its own nuclear program.
Ferguson says South Korea is currently capable of making 2,500 kilograms of near-weapons-grade plutonium, or enough to make more than 400 bombs, from 4 pressurized heavy water reactors at its Warsaw nuclear power plant. He added that Seoul also has the potential to make dozens of nuclear warheads every year within a 5-year period. Local experts say, however, that it is highly unlikely that South Korea would develop its own nuclear program.
South Korea relies heavily on exports, and its economy has developed through trust with the international community. So it is highly unlikely that it will develop its own nuclear program without a clear justification for doing so.
Experts say if the U.S. and the international community keep putting pressure on North Korea over its nuclear program and provide a nuclear shield, Seoul won't have a reason to develop its own nuclear weapons. Kim Yeon-bin, Arirang News.
Korea's historic low key rate has prompted Koreans to borrow more, and they're using most of the money for buying houses. That trend is a burden to the economy, but some experts say it's giving the economy a much-needed boost. Our Shin Se-min tells us more.
Korean households took out nearly $487 billion in bank loans as of the end of March, an increase of $3.7 billion from the previous month. It's the largest gain since Korea's Financial Supervisory Service started collecting such data in 2006. The financial watchdog attributes the rapid rise in borrowing to the country's record low key interest rate of 1.75%. The majority of borrowers took advantage of the low rate to buy houses, a move that's in line with government efforts to lift the sagging housing market. In Seoul alone, there were over 13,000 housing transactions in March, up by nearly 50% from a month earlier. Experts say ballooning household debt on the back of increased housing transactions is worrisome, but it is something the economy will have to endure.
Household debt is at an all-time high, and that could lead to a long-term depression, just like it did in Japan. But revitalizing the Korean economy through the housing market, for example, is much more urgent.
Forecasting the borrowing trend to continue for some time, experts added that more fixed-rate mortgage-backed loans like the government's relief loans are needed. Introduced by the Financial Services Commission in March, the program helps debtors to repay their loans over a longer period of time. Programs like these are just one of the ways the government may be able to strike a balance between controlling household debt and reviving the economy by fueling private spending. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
Korea logged yet another current account surplus in March and is poised to set a new record for month-on-month surpluses. It's reason enough to pop the bubblies, but apparently it's not. It's mainly due to slowing imports, suggesting domestic consumption is drying up. Our Kim Min-ji helps us look beyond the numbers.
Korea posted a current account surplus for the 37th straight month in March. The Bank of Korea says preliminary data shows the surplus hit almost $10.4 billion, up nearly 42% from the same month last year. The figure marks the highest level since a record $11.3 billion surplus in November 2014. At this rate, Korea is likely to break its previous record surplus streak of 38 months, which started back in June 1986. The balance of goods rose to over $11 billion last month, up from about $7.3 billion in February, as imports shrank at a faster rate than exports. Exports fell 8.4% to nearly $50 billion, while imports plunged almost 17% to about $38 billion. It did slow from last year, but falling exports coupled with a drop in imports points to a surplus trend that mainly stems from sluggish domestic demand.
The decline in both exports and imports will likely continue for some time, although the export volume hasn't fallen that much. Export prices have dropped significantly. Imports have also slumped due to a decline in raw material prices and slowing domestic consumption.
The experts said that while Korea will probably hit the central bank's $96 billion current account surplus target for this year, it doesn't indicate an improving economy. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
Well, tomorrow is Children's Day here in Korea, and
exactly.
I thought kids these days would read their idols or celebrities as the people they look up to the most or the people they treasure the most, but apparently that's not true, because according to a survey conducted in light of Children's Day coming up on Tuesday, 8 out of 10 respondents said their parents are the people they appreciate the most in their lives.
That's surprising. And the survey was conducted by a home learning program on nearly 23,000 students in elementary school. After parents, friends and others both came in second place at 7%, followed by teachers and family relatives.
And when asked why they appreciate their parents, most children said they're thankful for the comfort and sympathy they get from their mom and dad. Other reasons included kindness, encouragement, and unconditional love, stressing that kids are often too shy to express their appreciation. A program official said parents should initiate more conversations with their children. And now let's turn to some top international headlines. We connect to our Paul Yi at the news center.
Our focus today, police in the U.S. shoot dead 2 gunmen at an event depicting the Prophet Muhammad. Rescue efforts continue in Nepal, and production in China stalls for the second straight month.
Paul, let's start off in the United States. A shocking attack took place on Sunday near the city of Dallas. We thought we'd learned a lesson from the Charlie Hebdo incident not to do this, but apparently some anti-Islamic groups thought it would be fun to hold an event like this. They wanted to hold an event featuring cartoons of the Prophet Muhammad again. So give us the rundown of what went down there, Paul.
Well, 2 gunmen pulled up inside a suburb parking lot in Garland, Texas in the late afternoon when they began shooting at security. Now, police at the scene exchanged gunfire with the attackers, killing them in a shootout described to have lasted only seconds. One security guard was wounded but later released from hospitals. Authorities then called in a bomb squad which searched the suspect's vehicle for any possible explosives. Police say they have not yet identified the 2 men or established whether they had links to terrorism.
Close by, saw what was going on, engaged the 2 men, shot and killed them both there at the scene by their car. Because of the situation and what was going on today and history of what we've been told has happened at other events like this, we're considering their car as possibly containing a bomb.
The event that was under fire was organized by an American civic group critical of Islam. It was holding a contest for the best artwork or caricature of the Prophet Muhammad, acts which have drawn anger from Muslims and threats from radical followers. There were no immediate claims or responsibility for the attack. And turning to Nepal, over a week has passed since a powerful quake and a series of aftershocks devastated the country, and authorities are still trying to assess the widespread damage and huge loss of life. The death toll surpassed over 7,000 over the weekend as scores of bodies were pulled from the debris. The United Nations says over 600,000 houses have been destroyed or damaged. Meanwhile, the Indian Air Force says it has reopened supply lines to remote Himalayan regions where food and water are in dire need.
These people have, these helicopters have been able to pull out about 800 plus casualties, including badly injured ones, and about 2,000 plus individuals who are stranded, various nationalities, national, international, that is Nepalese origin, and various foreign nationals who have been here.
The United Nations says 8 million people, nearly a third of the country's population, was affected by the earthquake, with at least 2 million still without shelter. The Nepali government is worrying that the pace of rebuilding may fall short ahead of the annual monsoon season, which typically starts in June. And finally, China's manufacturing has dropped to its lowest level so far this year amid fears of further slowdown in the economy. According to HSBC and Marquette, Chinese factory activity fell to a reading of 48.9 in April. The results of the private survey come off the back of official data that was released Friday, indicating a stall in production since March. Analysts point to a dramatic shift stemming from weak domestic demand.
Well, I think China's manufacturing sector is undergoing a profound change right now, and it's almost a requisite for China, like every other economy and government in the world, to change how it's counting GDP. China is turning into a service economy, into a knowledge economy. You know, how many tons of steel does Alibaba use? You know, none. How much steel and cement does Tencent use? You know, answer, you know, virtually none.
Despite the slowdown, many economists say they're optimistic. China's central bank has already cut interest rate twice in the past 6 months, with policymakers vowing to reduce import duties and taxes, all in order to keep the world's second largest economy on target. And that wraps up our look at international stories for now. I'll see you back here tomorrow night.
Hello and welcome. I'm Hwang Ji-hye with your latest weather updates. Unlike the hot summer-like weather we had last week, temperatures have returned to seasonal norms under sunny skies, and thankfully, relatively high levels of fine dust in the west have dropped back to the normal range. And you know, it's Children's Day tomorrow here in Korea, but we're expecting chilly morning lows as there will be a big drop in our daily lows compared to today. Many parts of the peninsula will kick off the day in the single figures, but the afternoon should be as bright and warm as today with clear skies overhead. But if you plan on being outdoors all day long, keep in mind the big temperature gap from day to night and dress accordingly to avoid catching a cold. And on that note, let's take a closer look at the readings for tomorrow. The high in Seoul and Daegu will get up to 22 and 26, which is slightly higher than today. And Gwangju and Busan will top out at 24 and 23 respectively under lots of sunshine. Now let's see how other regions are looking. It seems like Daejeon and Jeju Island will top out at 24 and 19, while Dokdo rises to 20. Now warm and breezy spring weather is in store throughout the week, so hope you get to take advantage of these nice weather conditions before it gets too hot again. Well, that's all for Korea, and here's international weather for viewers around the world.
Children fountain, does that remind you of maybe fountain of youth? I heard we're working again tomorrow, which is a public holiday, and I find pride that we find joy in our work, which is the real fountain of youth, according to some. Well, that brings us to the end of our newscast. Thank you so much for staying with us. This has been Daniel Choy.
And I'm Hwang Ji-hye. Do join us at the same time tomorrow. Goodbye for now.